Turn with me, if you will, to the book of Acts, chapter number 28. Chapter number 28, we'll begin to read verse number 1. And when they were escaped, then they knew that the island was called Malta. And the barbarous people showed us, or the inhabitants of the island, showed us no little kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us, everyone, because of the present rain and because of the cold. And when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper or a snake out of the heat and fastened to his arm. When the barbarous people saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, "No doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he hath escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live." And he shook off the beast into the fire and felt no harm. Howbeit they looked, when he should have swollen and fallen down dead suddenly. But after they had looked a great while and saw no harm to him, they changed their minds and said, "He must be a god." The Apostle Paul, probably more than any other person who's ever lived, who preached the gospel, opened the doors to those areas that were closed. He was the first one that really dedicated his entire life to the work of the ministry in a country that was not his and where he was not born. And his primary audience was non-Jews, although he did preach to Jews. But Paul was a Roman citizen, and he was from the city of Tarsus. His father was in the sail-making business. They called them tent at that time. If you go and look at ancient history and read about the Babylonians, the Assyrians, or the Romans, or the Greeks, you'll never find in the original language the word sail, because the sails that they used on boats they called tents. And so Paul's father was a maker of sails for boats, and so Paul learned the industry also. And because of this occupation, and because that it was something that was needed and necessary for Roman commerce, then the citizens of Tarshish, which about 90% of them were in the sail-making business, was given the privilege of being Roman citizens. And the city was tax-free. They didn't have to pay any taxes to the Roman government or any local taxes. And they also had a kind of a salary. And each family was given a certain amount of money over and beyond what they would receive for the sale of the sails. And so Paul, being a Roman citizen, naturally his desire was someday and somehow I'd like to see Rome, the city of Rome, because at that time the world, regardless of what some people feel today, the world did not revolve around Jerusalem at that time. The world did not revolve around Antioch. It didn't revolve around Alexandria. It revolved around Rome. Okay? Rome was the mistress of the world. And its population fluctuated. In the wintertime, the population would be about 1.5 million people. This is about the time of Paul, about 1.5 million. In the summertime and in the spring, the city would swell to over 3.5 million people. And so it was a large city. I mean, think of a city like Dallas, and you get a good picture of Rome during the summertime. And so it was a place where everyone, especially Roman citizens, wanted to go. Now, God promised Paul that he was going to go to Rome, and he looked forward to it. In many of Paul's writings, he says that says to the folks at Thessaloniki, so on my way to Rome, I'm going to stop by and visit you. Or he would say to the folks at Athens, I'm going to be going to Rome, and when I do, I'll come and minister for you and preach to you. And so this happened on a number of occasions. 27 years before this particular event happened that we're talking about today, 27 years before that is the first time that God promised Paul, you're going to go to Rome. And you have to carry this gospel to the government in Rome itself, even to Caesar himself. Well, Paul anticipated that, and he knew it was going to happen. And he didn't know when it was going to happen, but he knew it was going to happen. Well, nothing happened for another 10 years. In 17 years before these events, God again told him, you're going to be going to Rome. He said it again 14 years before. And Paul continued to minister, founding churches, establishing the Word of God, and making disciples and so forth, and really putting all of his effort into spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ to the Roman world. But all the time, the back of his mind was ministering in Rome. And I'm sure that those mental pictures popped into his head that he would be preaching in the circus. I'm not talking about the circus with clowns and all that. They call the arena where they had this chariot races and where they had the gladiator games, they call those the circus. So I imagine Paul would have these mental visions of preaching and the whole stands being filled with people as he ministered to them and shared with them the gospel of Jesus Christ. He probably thought about establishing churches in Rome, establishing various other, maybe some education facilities that taught about Jesus in Rome. And so the mental pictures was undeniable as he waited and looked forward to that time that the Lord said, okay, Paul, now's the time. Well, he preached. 25 years went by. He was in Caesarea Maritima, a city that was the Roman headquarters for the province of Judea and for the province of Syria. And he was there and he got arrested. And I'm sure the thought went through his mind, now, what about Rome? Well, when he got arrested, that same night, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and says, Paul, don't be concerned about this. You have to go to Rome. And you'll be preaching in Rome. In fact, you'll be preaching at the house of Caesar himself. I said, oh, okay. But he never relieved himself of the chains. He went from one prison to the next. And finally, Paul, being a Roman citizen, had the right to appeal to Caesar for the crime that they said he had committed, which has caused an insurrection among the populace, which is basically treason against the Roman people. There were different types of treason. You had treason against Rome, treason against the Roman people, treason against the Roman Senate, and treason against Caesar. Jesus was crucified because he was accused of treason against Caesar. Paul was placed in prison because of causing insurrection among the people, was his crime, which would be treason against the Roman people. Well, he appealed to Caesar, made his application of appeal, and it was granted. Governor Felix had granted it. And so now Paul was going to Rome. But he was going as a bondservant or a bondslave. And so I imagine during this 27 years now, 27 years, during all that time, Paul most likely never envisioned himself going to Rome in chains. Lord, I just didn't picture the fulfillment of your promise like this. This was not like I had in mind. Now, Paul was placed in a galley ship, a prisoner ship. Now, there's 3 rows of oars. Y'all seen the movie Ben-Hur, and you saw these rowers. Well, there's 3 levels of oars. You got the top level, which you call oarsmen. And these oarsmen, they worked 8 hours on and 8 hours off. And after they worked their 8 hours, then they left their seats, and they could go and do whatever they wanted to do. They could go to sleeping quarters. They could go have something to eat or whatever, and then return after 8 hours for their next shift. So it was an 8 hours on, 8 hours off type thing. The second row we'll call oarsmen or galley oarsmen. And these galley oarsmen, they worked for 20 hours. So you sit in one place and you row in the oars. You did that for 20 hours, and then you could leave for 4 hours. During that 4 hours, you could go sleep, go to sleeping quarters, you could go eat, you could do whatever you wanted to do. And so that was the second level down. The third level down, these guys were called bond servants or bond slaves. They had remained there forever. They didn't leave their seat 24 hours a day. They were expected to row, and if they did have any type of rest, it was right there in the seat. Unfortunately for that is that they didn't have any bathroom breaks and so forth. And all of the filth from the top 2 decks came down on them. And this is where Paul was stationed as a bondservant, accused of treason against the Roman people. But then Paul counted it all joy for the sake of the gospel. Now, the promise of God, the prayer so-called, was now being answered. Paul was going to Rome, but it certainly wasn't on the white stallion. It wasn't a booking to the Marriott Hotel. And it wasn't a scheduled campaign or a scheduled crusade at the Beata Corsegas, the circus, to minister to tens of thousands of people. He was going on the third level bondservant, chained to his oars, never to be able to leave that seat until he got to Roman prison. It certainly was not what he envisioned. And the fulfillment of God's promise as he felt perhaps that he deserved. And certainly if a man needed the very best that God had to offer, it certainly was Paul. But now God's promise is being fulfilled in a way that certainly he never envisioned. On the way, the wind started to blow. There's a storm that hits the Mediterranean region. It's called a Eurocliton. It was then, still is today. A Eurocliton hits every 530 years, thereabout. This was in November of the year 59 AD. The last time a Eurocliton hit was more than 500 years before. There were certainly no records of it. or if there were, very few records. And so, just so happened, Paul was in a ship in the Mediterranean with the fulfillment of the 530th year. Eurocliton comes out of the Alps, and usually on the south side of the Alps. You know, a hurricane moves in a counterclockwise direction. A tornado moves in a clockwise direction. But a Eurocliton moves this way, okay? Not around and around, but like this. It comes out of the south side or the southern region of the Alps mountains in upper Italy, Austria, and that area. And then it moves down the land. And it picks up speed as it moves, contrary to, a hurricane. It hits the land, it slows down. Eurocliton, the land causes it to increase in its velocity. And it goes all the way down, pretty much all the way down until it hits the Adriatic Sea, and then continues on the Adriatic into the Mediterranean Sea. Now, there's characteristics of Eurocliton that's quite devastating. First of all, it will last. The wind will blow and so forth, and the rain and the wind and so forth last for at least 40 to no more than 50, but about 45 days on average. 45 days. The wind blows at about anywhere between 70 and 150 miles an hour all the time. All right? Now, it begins to rain, and it's a devastating downpour for 15 days, right around 15 days. But it continues to rain, and the weather continues to produce the rain for an additional 25 days. For at least 40 to 45 days, the rain is continual, and the wind is continual. And it's the most devastating storm that ever hits the Mediterranean Sea. The last one hit in 1927. So we still got a few more years before the 530 is complete. But with Paul, it became complete. And then when he was in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, that thing that had not happened for more than 500 years, 530 years, had not happened. Just so happened, it hit at the time that Paul was most vulnerable. God, aren't the chains enough? Isn't the bondservant enough? Isn't the fulfillment of your promise that you made for me 27 years ago, me waiting for you, isn't that enough? Why are we now subjected to the worst thing that ever happens in this area, and doesn't even happen but every 5 centuries, but it's happening now? I just don't understand. But God had a purpose. There were 276 people aboard this ship. When the Eurocliton hit, they didn't know what to do. Paul had a vision from the Lord. He said, if you just stay with the ship, it's going to crash. You're going to have a shipwreck, and it's going to be destroyed. But if you stay with the ship, you'll be spared. Your life will be spared. Don't jump overboard. Don't try to hang on to the lifeboats, because it is going to be destroyed. But just hold on. Well, the centurion who was in charge listened to Paul, gave the order, and that's exactly what happened. In the midst of the storm, they had already gotten rid of everything they could get rid of to make the ship not sink or not to have a shipwreck. Didn't work. And so the ship crashed just south of the island of Malta. Now, if any of you ever been to Malta, you know it's not the best tourist spot in the world. They have about maybe 18 inches or 2 feet worth of soil that covers the land. They produce a few olives, but outside of that, they produce tourists, and that was about it. Same way at this time. They crashed, and they finally got to the shoreline of Malta, and everyone was saved. Everyone was, no one died in the shipwreck. But now here they were in this island of Malta. And so now Paul was then doing the work that he's supposed to do. He was a bondservant, and so his job was to do whatever the centurion told him he must do. This time around, he was gathering sticks to put on a fire, and it was still raining. Wind was still blowing. And so the fire had to be started probably in a cave or something like that. And it was probably difficult to pull together that the type of wood that was needed. There's really not a whole lot of wood in Malta. What I can remember, you can probably count the trees on 2 hands, and it just was not a lovely place to visit. But there they were. The people of the town, or the people of the island, received them, knowing full well that they were victims of the shipwreck, and they thought maybe Paul was a little extra evil because the storm didn't take him, but now he was subject to another very interesting type situation. Those of you who have shoestrings, look down at your shoes. You see those shoestrings? That's about the size of this snake. They're called vipers. And they're about 12 inches long and about the size of a shoestring that you have on your shoes. But they are the most poisonous and the most vicious snake in the Sahara Desert. We've seen many of them in our time in Egypt. I've been bit by them a few times, bite my boots, but because they're so small, their teeth are very tiny. And the teeth don't go through boots. It has to be on regular skin. And what happens is that these vipers will normally try to wrap themselves around your hand or your ankle or something like that. And then they have the head of the snake is very small, and it just goes. If it wraps itself around your hand, the snake's head just go up and down, just like that, until they find a vein or an artery. And when they do, it just it clamps down with those teeth, and it injects the poison into your vein or into your artery that they discover. All right, now what happens is that almost immediately the body begins to react with this intense heat. It feels like your entire body is on fire from within. And it causes the blood to begin to congeal, just like Jell-O. And the heart begins to try to pump harder and harder and harder. And it can't. It wears the heart out by trying to pump this. And so within the first 5 to 10 minutes, the people are absolutely burning up alive inside. And then they start with this tremendous pain because of the heart trying to pump the blood. And then after about 15 minutes, the body has swollen to the point that the skin actually tears open or breaks open, and the fluid on the inside of the body begins to come out of the broken skin after about 15 minutes or so. And then after about 20 minutes, the heart can't take anymore, and they collapse and die. And the viper bite is 100% fatal. I'm standing in the midst of God's Widow's Farm, which is actually a local phenomenon around here. And what you're seeing are the grapes that come from this farm. Before God gave us this acreage, originally 6 acres, now 10 acres, this plot of land was producing about 1 ton of produce or grapes or whatever it was producing, about 1 ton an acre. But what has made this so phenomenal is that we're now averaging between 9 and 10 tons an acre on whatever is planted. Now, you see the grapes here, but we also raise eggplant, both black and yellow eggplant. There's corn, okra, squash. We have tomatoes, apricots, mangoes, and with the onions and grapes and onions and garlic and leeks, and it's just phenomenal. And what we do, we produce this, and the widows get the first crops, and we satisfy their needs first, and then once the widows are satisfied with the fresh produce, then we sell it, the remainder, and with the money that we get from the produce that we sell at market, then we can buy them blankets and shoes and school supplies and clothes and things like that they need. And if they need to go to the doctor, then we can pay for their doctor's visit, dentist visits, and so forth. And so this God's Widow's Farm produces all of that. We're supporting about 1,200 widows a month, plus their children, and it's just absolutely phenomenal what God is doing here, and it's actually beyond belief the type of produce that comes off of this farm, and it's just, and there's no chemicals, no preservatives that goes into anything. It's just absolutely wonderful, and the taste is, again, phenomenal.
God's Widow's Farm is made possible by supporters of the Cubit Foundation. You can help today by visiting cubitfoundation.org and give your gift of hope.